Hello everyone. So today we will start with this topics, the environment and population, community dynamics, ecosystem physiology, zoological classification and developmental biology, pollution and conservation, Mendelian genetics. So let us start with environment and population today. So in this topic, the first thing that you need to understand is the levels of organization in an ecosystem. So starting from the lowest level to the highest level, the first one is the species or individual. So an individual, as you can understand, is any living thing or organism. Like I am an individual, you are an individual, like that. But individuals which are living in a particular area at the same time, and they are similar in all aspects, like their diet is similar, they are living in the same place at the same time, they can reproduce among themselves, and all these qualities when a group of individuals show, then we call it a species. So like here the example is given, a goldfish which is interacting with its environment, that is known as an individual. Now if the goldfish starts living with other goldfishes of its type, then it is called a population. Now when there are different species of organisms living together in a particular environment, like you can see a jellyfish over here, a crab over here, and the goldfish, all these are when they're living together, then they form a community. And when all these communities start living together and interacting with their environment, here you can see that this is an aquatic environment, so they are living in the water, they are interacting with each other, also they are dependent upon the physical nature of the water, what is the temperature of it, what is the oxygen content of the water, all these things, they are dependent on that. So then we call it an ecosystem. Now when a number of ecosystems are there together, then we call it a biome. And lastly, when a number of biomes together involving the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere is the land, atmosphere is the air, and hydrosphere is the water, obviously. So all these combined together, and along with all the different biomes, we call it a biosphere. So this is the level of organization in an ecosystem. So from here to here, that lowest point to the highest point, we can see how an ecosystem is formed, and different ecosystems, how they make a biosphere. So the next thing is that here if we consider a goldfish as an individual, then we can say that the goldfish is family, friends, they become a population. Next is the community. So when the goldfish, salmons, crabs, they start coexisting together in the same location, then we can call it a community. Then ecosystem is how they start to interact with the abiotic components. Abiotic means the non-living components, then we call it ecosystem. And biome, like I've already said, is a set of ecosystems together along with all their environments and everything. And biosphere is the combination of all these different biomes, combining all the different geographical habitats, and as well as the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, all together, the humans living on this earth, and everything together is the sum of all ecosystems on earth, and therefore we call it a biosphere. So an ecosystem may have biotic factors as well as abiotic factors. So the biotic factors are the living factors, or actually it can also include the once living parts. That means the dead and decaying organisms, the dead plants, the decaying matter, those are also biotic factors. And abiotic factors include the non-living parts of an ecosystem, the physical components like air, water, temperature, rocks, sands, light, etc. So all these are abiotic factors. So if we can tabulate it in this manner, it will be seen that the factors of ecosystems are either abiotic or biotic, and in abiotic factors we can consider the inorganic components like the oxygen, nitrogen, different gases. the organic components like the proteins and fats, and as well as the physical components like I already said, the sunlight, the soil, the temperature, the air, water, etc. These are also the abiotic factors. Now the biotic factors, they are the autotrophs or producers, and the heterotrophs or the ones who cannot prepare their own food. So autotrophs or producers, we all know, are the green plants which have their chlorophyll and they can photosynthesize, they can prepare their own food, and these heterotrophs are the ones dependent upon the producers for their food. So heterotrophs can be consumers or decomposers. Consumers can be primary, secondary or tertiary. Primary consumers are usually the herbivores that feed on the green plants, the grass-eating animals. Secondary consumers are those that feed on the primary consumers, and they are called carnivores. They can also be omnivores. Omnivores are those animals which feed on both plants and animals. And the tertiary consumers which actually feed upon the secondary consumers. So this is a chain-wise system, and these are the different types of consumers. And in our ecosystem, another main component of the ecosystem are the decomposers, which are actually involved in decaying the dead organism and decaying the dead matter, and then converting them into nutritional components of the soil, and the soil usually takes up the minerals and nutrients from the dead and decaying organism, and the plants, they start collecting this nutrition from the soil, and then they are able to grow. They are able to prepare their own food, and therefore they are also able to provide food for the heterotrophs. So these are the components of ecosystem. Next thing, okay, so next is the habitat and niche. So habitat and niche is basically, the two terms are quite similar in meaning, but they are still very different, and it is very important if you understand them. So habitat is the environmental area or the physical space that is occupied by a particular organism or species in an environment at a particular time. So that particular physical space is known as habitat. But on the other hand, the niche is actually a reflection of the organism's function in that environment, its role in the ecosystem, its behavior, its activity, all together combined becomes the niche of the organism. So it is the ecological role of a species in the community, and it is also multidimensional. So it cannot be defined as one single term, but it is a combination of all these little dimensions of one organism or species, and it becomes a niche. So if we can see here, that species that share the same resources, they have similar ecological niche. So therefore if they have the similar resource utilization, then they will be sharing the same kind of niche, and therefore there will be overlap of their niches, and this is known as a niche overlap. Suppose there are two species A and species B. So species A has a niche of this, and species B has a niche of this range. So we can easily say that this is the niche overlap, or the overlapping region of both of their niches. Now this is known as the niche breadth, and this from the maxima to this maxima is known as a niche separation. So what we can say from here is that species A has a narrow niche breadth which makes it a specialist, and species B has a wide niche breadth which makes it a generalist. So if I say that I like both Indian cuisine, Chinese cuisine and all that, so I am a generalist. So my niche is quite a wide range. But if I just say no, I only like Asian or only Chinese food I like, I do not like any other cuisine, then it makes me a specialist. My niche becomes narrower and it makes me a specialist. So according to that, there are two kinds of niches: fundamental niche and realized niche. So you can understand that if there is no competition or there is absence of competitors at all, there is no restriction from the others and all, so then my niche will be the maximum niche that I can occupy. So if in a forest, if one animal has a particular niche and it sees that there is no other competitor in the area, so what it will try to do? It will try to take over all the place, all the food, all the land and everything. It will try to take it all. So that is the fundamental niche, when it can potentially occupy the maximum that it can. But in nature, we all know that there are always competitors, there will be always some kind of resistance. So for that, the niche, fundamental niche, will be restricted to a smaller region, which is known as the realized niche. So when in presence of competitors, the animal cannot move around everywhere, cannot go and have all the food available. It cannot do that. Therefore, it can only occupy or explore a particular area, a particular type of food, and not beyond that. So then it is called a realized niche. So this is the difference between fundamental niche and realized niche. So, like I have already said, habitat versus niche, and also the resource partitioning. If two or different species are living together and in a particular habitat, and we can see that there is the bay-breasted warbler, there is Cape May warbler, there is yellow-rumped warbler. So you can see their habitat is the same, that this spruce tree is the habitat for all these species of warblers. But their niches are different because each of them have segregated a zone for themselves, and they are trying to stay in that zone only. So this Cape May warbler feeds at the tip of the branches near the top of the tree, and the bay-breasted warbler is feeding in the middle part of the tree, and the yellow-rumped warbler is feeding in the lower part of the tree at the base of the branches. So you can clearly see that they have partitioned the whatever resource they have partitioned it among themselves so that the competition is minimum. So they can coexist together without competing with each other, without eliminating any of the species. So in this way, three species of warbler are staying together in the same habitat but in different niches, and their behavior, their feeding habits, their reproductive ability, those are also in those particular zones only, and therefore they have restricted themselves to their realized niches. So this is the difference between a habitat and a niche. So habitat is like I said, is the physical space occupied by an organism, but this niche is actually the role of the organism within this environment, its function or activity, and its association with different biotic and abiotic components of the environment, its diet, its reproduction and other activities. But habitat, it reflects only the place of living or the physical space occupied by the organism. So this is the major difference. So like I said, this producers, autotrophs, consumers are the heterotrophs, and the primary consumers are herbivores, and secondary consumers can be both carnivores and omnivores. So next thing is the competitive exclusion principle, or the Gauss's law of competitive exclusion. So this law states that no two species can exactly occupy the same niche, because if they do so, then one species will compete with another and it will eliminate the other species. So this is a very famous experiment done by Gauss, and he actually did an experiment with paramecium using two species of paramecium. One is P. aurelia and one is P. caudatum, and it showed in these graphs, you can see that when it is P. aurelia alone, given the same food, same environment, same water, same air, everything, every condition same, when it is P. aurelia alone, it is growing rapidly. When it is P. caudatum alone, it is also growing rapidly. But when both species are grown together, then you see that P. aurelia is competing with P. caudatum and not allowing it to grow. It is P. aurelia is the one which is dominant species over here. So they grow well individually, and but when they are competing for the same set of resources, then we can see that one species is eliminating the other species, because quite natural, for survival they need to have their own food, so they are eliminating it. But when we change the environmental parameters, when we change the certain food and certain water conditions and all that, then we see that P. chordatum is also able to grow. That means it has separated its niche from the P. aureolia's niche, and therefore it is now able to grow. So this is a very good example of the law of nature. Like when in a forest or in a grassland or anywhere where wild animals are competing with each other for food constantly, so then one species is usually eliminating the other species, and this is known as competitive exclusion principle. When they have a chance to share their niche, they will not share it at all. They will just eliminate the other species and try to live in that area, in that having all the resources of that area. So this is Gauss's law of competitive exclusion. Now, resource partitioning, like I've already talked about the warblers in that example. Here another example is mentioned about two lizards. So one species, it is living in the couple meters from the ground, at the ground level, and the other species, it feeds in the branches above 2 meters. So they have a deal among themselves. So you will stay just in the ground level and have the insects and everything from the 2 meters from the ground level only, and above that when you go, the other species, you will see the other species feeding on the branches above 2 meters. So in this way, they have devised a method how to partition the resources, or whatever resources that are available, how to share them among themselves so that they can coexist together one beside other and not competing or not eliminating each other. So next is the population growth. So population size is basically this very simple, the number of individuals in a population. That is the population size. But what is population density? Density is actually defined as the number of individuals per unit area of the environment. Just like we calculate the density of any other substance, the density of population is also calculated in the same way. Now, a per unit area or per unit volume of the environment. So we know that actually in the forest, a particular animal or any species cannot occupy the entire, is not able to occupy the entire space available in the forest. Because if you can see, when there is a land animal or terrestrial animal, so in a forest there are some water bodies like rivers, ponds, lakes. A land animal is not able to occupy or not able to live in any of those water bodies. That means the area available to that animal has decreased from the total area. So then we call it the ecological density. So we divide the number of individuals by the unit area of only the space that can be occupied by that organism. So in case of a land animal, then we can consider the water bodies as a non-habitant space, and therefore we can consider the area of the water bodies deducted from the total area of the forest. And then we consider the density. So that is the ecological density or the specific density. But if we do not do this deduction, and if we consider the total area of the forest as the total space, and we divide the number of organisms by this total space, then we get the crude density. So this is the difference between crude density and ecological density. So another example can be given here, like this is a pond. We are considering a pond where in June, the summer, extreme summer months, the water level has gone down, and again in December it has come up. So we can see that the crude density, that is the total number of fishes per unit area, has increased, because when the water level is dropping, the density of fishes in that water body starts increasing. So in June, from June, if you see, there is a rise in the ecological density. But At the same time, there is a fall in the crude density. Why? Because for predators, it becomes very easy to catch fish at that time because the water level is low and the fishes can be easily spotted. Maximum number of fishes are congested together, they are clumped together. So it's very easy for the predators to come and catch the fish at that time. So therefore the crude density will decrease. But since the water level has gone down, therefore the actual habitat space of the fish is going down. Therefore the ecological density will definitely increase. So this is the reason why there was a study and it showed that the wood stork is a fish eating bird, and they prey on the fish during the summer months. Mostly they start to lay eggs before the summer, because this is the rectangle part. This is showing that it is laying eggs in this time zone. Why? Because they know that once their eggs hatch and they will be requiring a lot of food for their babies and for themselves. So when the water level is dropping in the summer, that becomes a very crucial time for them to feed on the fishes, and it's easier to catch fish at that time also. So therefore they have changed their nesting pattern or egg laying pattern according to the population density of their prey. So this is a very good example how population density is playing a role in the prey-predator relationship, also in their reproductive pattern and their reproductive ability. So therefore this water levels, when it is down, the crude density is also down, because the wood stork is feeding on these fishes constantly. But the ecological density has increased because in this low level of water also the number of fish is quite high. So when you calculate the density, it will be very high. So ecological density has increased. But the total number of fish in the entire forest, say, has decreased because the crude density is decreasing. So this is an example of the ecological and the crude density. So next what we have is the population dispersion or distribution pattern. So you can see that there are three different patterns mostly by which the population is dispersed or it is distributed. So one is the random. We can see here that very clearly the species or organisms are randomly distributed. So next is the uniform. So if we plant trees in a particular line and we can see that there is a pattern forming, so then we call it uniform distribution of organisms. Third is the clumped. If one space is occupied by all the species and they are clumping together, then we call it a clumped distribution. So next, coming to the age structure. So we all know that in a population there are different age groups. One is the pre-reproductive age group, then is the reproductive age group, and the last one is the post-reproductive age group. So according to the number of individuals in these three age groups, we can form pyramids called age pyramids. So the shape of the pyramid represents what kind of population it is. So if it is a triangle base with a broad base, we understand that the pre-reproductive population is much high. So therefore it is a young population or it is a growing population. And next is when we see it's a bell-shaped pyramid, it is known as a stable population because there is an equal number of young age individuals and middle-aged individuals. Therefore, the growth rate is very, very stable. Lastly, this is a declining population or an urn-shaped population where the reproductive and post-reproductive individuals are quite high in number compared to the pre-reproductive individuals. So this is a declining population. So in this way, we can segregate populations based on their different age groups. Now, so if we consider this kind of an age pyramid, then it is a rapid growth, but this is a slow growth because it has increased quite slowly, and this is an exponential increase like you can see, and this is zero growth because it's very stable. It's a stable bell-shaped population, and this is a negative growth, there is no growth but there is only declining population. So this is an urn-shaped curve or a urn-shaped pyramid or a negative growth. Next is the natality and mortality. So natality means birth rate, very simple, and death rate is the mortality. So when we are talking about natality or birth rate, then you have to think that by birth the population size is increasing. So new organisms are being added to the population and it is increasing in size. But there is an absolute or maximum potential of a population. So if all the females are reproducing to their maximum level at the same time, then there will be an exponential growth in population size. So that maximum birth rate is known as maximum natality. It is also called the fecundity rate. But we all know that in nature this is not possible, and there will be always some kind of resistance, some factors, external factors or internal factors, which do not let it happen. So in that case, we have a natality or a birth rate which is quite lower than the absolute or maximum natality. So that lower or actual observed natality is known as ecological natality or realized natality. That takes into consideration all the environmental factors, all the internal and external factors that are required for the birth rate to be controlled. And just the reverse is happening in case of mortality or death rate. So mortality means the death of populations. That means the individuals are constantly subtracted from the population. Therefore, in an ideal case, there will be minimum mortality rate. The population will be constantly surviving, and there will be less number of death, so the minimum mortality is the ideal condition. But here also we know that this is just not possible. Minimum loss under ideal conditions is just not possible. So there will be always some other factors which govern the mortality rate and which will help to increase the number of dead individuals, like predation, like disease, like ecological hazards, natural calamities. These things, like some catastrophic situations, these things cannot be controlled, and therefore they will lead to a number of dead individuals and the mortality rate will rise. So that realized or ecological mortality rate is higher than the minimum mortality. Next is a term that is very important, that is the biotic potential. This biotic potential is known as the maximum reproductive power of a particular organism. So if there is no environmental resistance at all, if the population is growing exponentially, then the potential of the population is known as the biotic potential. Just like here, if you see that this is the biotic potential when the growth is without limits, it is an exponential growth. And when some kind of environmental resistance is there, then competition is limiting the growth and the biotic potential is not realized. But here, the capacity of the environment is up to this mark only. This is known as K, or carrying capacity, and the growth of the population will be limited to that carrying capacity only. So here this is known as a logistic growth, and it is because of the environmental resistance and competition from other species. But here it is known as exponential growth, and it is only governed by the biotic potential. It is unlimited growth. It's a J-shaped curve. So we can understand very clearly that without the environmental resistance, the biotic potential will lead to an exponential growth of the population. But due to the exponential environmental resistance present there, it will only lead to the logistic growth. And the population density or the size of the population is governed by the natality rate, which adds to the population, and minus the mortality, that is the death of the population, and also the immigration, that is the migration of individuals from outside to the same area, will lead to the increase in population size, and the emigration, that is just the reverse, the migration of the individuals from that area to outside, will lead to minus E, that is lead to decreasing the population density. So from here we can understand that what is a life table. A life table is actually a table of the group of population, where all the little details like the natality, mortality, the biotic potential, everything is tabulated in a tabulated form and collected and in a tabulated form. So that is known as a life table. Next is a very important thing, that is a survivorship curve. A survivorship curve is basically a graph showing the individuals in a population and the percentage of organisms surviving in a population along with time or their age. So we can see there are three types of survivorship curves. The first type is the humans, where the death happens at a much later age, and at a younger age usually no death happens. So loss is realized at the later age. So therefore this type 1 is the humans. It is this curve, and the middle curve is the type 2, and it is the death is not related to age. Anywhere the loss can happen at any age. And the type 3, where it is a very early loss, and here you can see that at an early age the population declines and then it extends like this. So the examples are given here, and like I said, the population can be controlled by births, deaths and migration. So population change R is equal to birth minus death plus immigrants minus emigrants. This I have already discussed. Now coming to the survivorship curve in a detail, we can say that this is a convex curve. It has late loss, it has high survivorship throughout life, and majority of the population reaches maturity. Next is the diagonal curve. Type 2 is a constant loss, that it is independent of age. There will be some loss at every age. And the third type is the concave curve, where early loss is seen. So low mortality after maturity. And therefore, there are some other examples also, that for type 1, type 2 and type 3 survivorship curves. And next is the population growth curve. So like I have already mentioned, that without any environmental resistance there will be an exponential growth, and this growth rate can be determined by dN by dt equal to Rn. N is the population size and R is the biotic potential. And when there is an environmental resistance playing into action, then we can say that it will only increase up to the carrying capacity of the environment. Above that, the environment cannot hold any more individual from that population. So this rate can be determined by dN by dt equal to Rn into K minus N by K, where K is the carrying capacity of the environment. So here if you see here that this J-shaped curve will rise when there is a biotic potential without the environmental resistance, but it will soon turn into an S-shaped logistic growth curve when there is carrying capacity and there is environmental resistance. So this increase in the initial stage is known as intrinsic rate of population growth, but once it reaches the carrying capacity, before that it is the maximum rate of population growth, and just when it reaches the carrying capacity it reaches the plateau stage, and therefore it cannot increase any further from here. Just like this. There is exponential growth over here with time, and there is logistic growth, there is carrying capacity. Up to that only it will increase. So these are the two different kinds of population growth curves. One is J-shaped and one is this S-shaped. And here I am ending this first video, and if you have any questions or doubts, we can solve them in the doubt clearing class. Thank you.